Today, we're just crowded in a space where the easiest thing is to grow it in Illinois or Israel and sell it domestically. But 10 years from now, that's going to change. And so if Cleverleafs can survive that journey, it will change the way that this cannabis industry looks in a decade.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Welcome to another episode. Meet Kyle Detweiler, the CEO of Cleverleafs. Prior to the integration of Northern Swan and Cleverleafs in 2019, Detwiler served as CEO and co-founder of Northern Swan Holdings, as well as co-founded Silver Swan Capital, an investment firm focused on niche and underfollowed sectors. He was also a principal at the Blackstone Group, a leading alternative investment manager with $619 billion in assets under management. As an early member of the Tactical Opportunities Fund, Mr. Detwiler was involved in the management and served as a board member of 7 investments with roughly $1 billion of Blackstone Capital. Mr. Detwiler was previously a member of the private equity practice at KKR, focusing on transactions in the oil and gas, energy, natural resource, and healthcare sectors. He began his career as an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. Detwiler graduated with distinction from Harvard Business School and cum laude from Princeton University. Kyle Detwiler, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders all the way from Florida. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. The CEO of Cleverleafs. Today we're talking about cannabis. And Cleverleafs, from my understanding, you're looking pretty broadly at this ecosystem, at this emerging market, especially in the United States, and both from a very, sustainable and ecological perspective, but also from a business perspective. So I'm really curious to dive deep into the cannabis industry with you and specifically Cleverleafs. But before all that, Kyle, share with me a little bit about yourself and with everything else, all the really interesting things you've done in the past, how do you find yourself getting into the cannabis industry?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a small town in rural United States, in a state called South Dakota. I was a child of the Nancy Reagan Just Say No era. I wasn't a very big supporter of cannabis. I didn't use it. It's not that I had some big objections to it. I just didn't think that there was really medical or social value to the product, honestly, until my eyes were really opened when I was in my early 30s. And, I really started to understand how it had positively impacted, a number of friends or even family members. And so I connect that with my career choice, for the last, maybe for the decade before I helped start Cleverleafs. I focused on investing in various businesses from different private equity firms. So I was largely working at the KKR and the Blackstone Group. And I focused on investing in pharmaceutical companies, often where the emphasis was on trying to create low-cost manufacturing in places like Israel, Southeast Asia. And the other half of the time was spent in the natural resource space. And a lot of that was in agriculture. So blueberries, sugarcane, asparagus, those types of things. And the idea for a lot of those crops is to move them to the equator where you can grow it year round, have better carbon footprint, do it in a much more environmentally friendly way, and also hopefully make a higher margin over the long run. And so when I looked at cannabis, the simple idea was to combine those two lessons that I learned in pharmaceuticals and in ag to create a more fashion-forward cannabis company. And that's what we built here at Cleverleafs.
What is the cannabis space? As you're seeing it yourself, tell me, your perspective on the cannabis space, and even take me back to when you're just entering it. Sort of what was your observation and what sort of unfolded in your eyes? Because obviously, the industry is huge, but the world is even bigger. And I think people every day are getting introduced to this space and are discovering it, probably what you've already discovered years ago.
Yeah, well, it's a really complicated question because the laws around cannabis change in every country in the world and every state of the world. And so I really look at the cannabis industry in 3 parts. First, there's the U.S. cannabis industry, which has a lot of attention, but it's still federally illegal. It may be legal at the state level. And so those companies exist in sort of this strange little ecosystem where you can't bring product from California into Massachusetts and vice versa, and you can't have reliable banks. It's this weird anachronism. The second industry would be the Canadian industry. It was one of the first major countries to legalize. But I think most people understand you shouldn't grow cannabis in the tundra. If you thought of all the competitive advantages that Canada would have over time, probably producing an agricultural product in an environmentally friendly way, it was probably not the first thing on the list. And so then the third category of the cannabis industry is everyone else. Colombia, Brazil, Israel, Germany, Australia, those countries are legalizing cannabis in a federally legal way, which means that the companies can interact. Israelis can get cannabis from Colombia. They can get it from Portugal. They could get it even from Canada due to Canada's position on trade. And so the industry is being built from scratch. And so you go back 5 years ago, I think investors or anybody interested in the space would say, hey, if I wanted to get involved in cannabis, I'd really love to go join a really great branded company, or I want to join a really big industrial scale producer. Well, 5 years ago, they didn't exist.
Wow.
They all had to get built, right? And so for the last 5 years, I think each of these industry sections has been built up. Cleverleafs is a good example of sort of like a Cargill or of the sector. It's trying to be a big industrial producer, but I've seen a flurry of activity from new technology companies, different ways to consume cannabis, different brands. It's been quite remarkable.
Incredible. And so if we're looking at Cleverleafs 4 years ago, paint me a picture of where you're at 4 years ago, and sort of what is your understanding of the market and the pain point that Cleverleafs, and at the end amounting to a very big success. What was that understanding that you had 4 years ago and that conviction?
Sure. I would say, if you went to a cannabis conference 4 years ago, and I'm going to speak completely about the fully legal and regulated side of the cannabis market. I won't talk about the unregulated market. I would say the choice for most participants at that point was, do you grow in Canada or do you grow in the United States? That was really just the main question. Nobody was thinking about countries like Colombia. Nobody was thinking, at least in the United States, was thinking about scaling something up in Germany.
Why do you think that
Portugal.
is? What was blocking people from looking outside and saying, well, yeah, great, we have US and Canada, but we have actually the whole world at our disposal?
I think it's probably two things. Number one, people are always focused on what's in front of them, right? If you're an American living in Florida or California or New York, you were probably, and cannabis was still illegal, you were most interested in seeing that legalization happen so that you could be part of the product and that ecosystem at home, right? That was what most people were focused on. And I'd say the second reason why most Americans didn't know what was going on in Tel Aviv, for example, was just that it was still emerging, right? The Israeli market has changed quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years, and so people kind of heard stories about it, but it was all very small, or it was very isolated, right? We were talking about countries like Israel or Uruguay or Canada. They were just beginning, but nothing had really been built out yet, right? The Israeli market was a fraction of the size it was today. Same with Germany, and so that also helped keep people focused on other things.
Mm-hmm. And so Cleverleafs, what is the role that Cleverleafs today plays in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, so Cleverleaf's mission in the space is really to change the way that cannabis is produced. Most people are unaware that to produce an ounce of cannabis in indoor conditions where you have the tightest environmental controls and you can make the buds the biggest and manipulate the colors and manipulate a lot of different attributes about it, it's just terrible for the environment.
Really?
So 1 ounce of cannabis production, if grown indoors, emits as much CO2 into the atmosphere as a whole car tank full of gas.
No.
Right? It's crazy.
Wow. Okay, I had no idea.
Yeah, and I think, most consumers today, they also have their dream with cannabis, right? Right now it's novelty. They just want to get access to cannabis. And then later they will start learning about the environmental repercussions of their choices. But if you left cannabis for a second and you moved into milk or protein-based meats, that the whole purpose of having plant-based meats today is because of this environmental problem. So we're kind of positioning ourselves almost as that beyond meat of cannabis and thinking about what will be the future way that consumers want this, and they want it grown in a sustainable way. In our sites in Colombia, for example, we don't have supplemental lighting. We don't have to contend with snow. We don't have indoor facilities to keep out pests because we cultivate at 8,300 feet of elevation. The greatest deviation of sunlight in terms of the number of minutes a day we get from winter solstice to summer solstice is 12 minutes. So we have 12 hours of sunlight year round. And that is where, if God was to create a site to produce cannabis, it would probably go naturally into a place like Colombia, and we're going to harness the power of that and spread that cannabis to the world.
And so if obviously, all of this is built on a greater trend and a greater ecosystem that is being built around the world. Firstly, from your perspective, coming from Blackstone, from different investment organizations and going into the cannabis industry, I'm sure that many around you weren't yet acquainted with what's happening, and some of it may still be taboo. Did you experience any discomfort or any weird conversations with people as you're trying to sort of be a part of this educating the market on what's happening here?
Oh, 100%. And I have to count myself in that first category. Sure. I remember, my co-founder brought up the idea of looking at the cannabis space, and I was pretty dismissive about it. And it was before, I think he was a little shy at that time about sharing what cannabis did for him. And in his case, he battles insomnia, and cannabis was really the main tool that got him through his 20s. And I kind of heard that, and it just changed the way, I was opposed to even trying it, until kind of I really, saw that, saw that experience firsthand. And then I went on to, and found another, a friend of mine from college. His wife was battling, what might have been, terminal cancer. And, the only thing that was able to get her through the chemotherapy was, cannabis-laced coffee beans. It helped restore her, her hunger and ability to eat. And just, you start piling up these anecdotes, and then your perception just changes. And so I admit, I had it wrong. For most of my life, I had it wrong. And when I finally started to study the data points, look at the research, see that cannabis is not really a gateway drug, but that it is an exit drug in terms of weaning people off of deadly opioids. I've really just come 180 on this topic. Incredible.
Now, what role do you think Cleverleafs has, if any, in part of this market education and part of, it sounds like you're coming in now with a really deep conviction. You're coming with all these case studies and anecdotes that you're saying, well, this, we're learning one thing, but actually we have this abundance of examples of how this is transforming people's lives. Do you feel Cleverleafs has any part in this market education?
100%. We're doing our best as we can. Part of the education is about the environmental consequences of different decisions of how to produce cannabis. But another good advantage that Cleverleafs has is our cost structure. When you don't grow cannabis in Canada, and you can grow it instead in places where it grows more naturally, like Colombia, we lower the cost for the system substantially. In Canada, it costs $2 a gram to make cannabis. In Colombia, we can do it for less than 15 cents. And so what does that enable us to do? We can pass those savings on to our clients, our customers, which are other big cannabis brands, and then they can lower the cost of access for the whole system. We can lower the cost for patients. I think, a lot of people out there will have strong opinions about generic pharmaceuticals, for example. Are they good things? Are they bad things? And I would say, we can leave the ultimate conclusion up to society to decide, but generic drugs are cheaper, which means they can get into hands of more patients and go and treat more conditions. And I think that's really what we can do to cannabis. Now, we're just starting on our journey. We face a lot of headwinds as a company. You would not think it would be difficult to do what we do, but we are the first company to ever legally export cannabis from Colombia. You can imagine the history around this is
I can only imagine.
Pretty strong. And so we have to change regulatory paths. We have to get airlines comfortable with taking our product. And so we're on that mission. We just have to gain that mission of acceptance. And then once it's accepted, I don't think anyone in the world questions, hey, will a cannabis company that is 90% lower in operating costs than almost everyone else in the world be a successful business model in 10 years? Everybody agrees that's going to work out okay. But it's just really like the hiccups of the next year or two that we have to get over.
What part of this journey do you find most exhilarating? As an entrepreneur, as a leader now of this publicly traded company, what is the most exciting part of this whole puzzle?
I don't know. I would say, we're really just trying to do things completely different and for the first time. My favorite quote of Elon Musk's is that, the value of what you create is inversely correlated to the difficulty of the challenges you overcome. And there are many other easier business models out there in cannabis than what we're trying to do. If you want to make a quick buck, you should start a cannabis company in California or, Florida, try to grow it in as, little of a regulated environment as you can, and you'll be able to sell it. It's a question of, do you sell it at, $5 a gram or $3 a gram based on the quality. Cleverleafs fights every day on whether or not its product can even get out of the country. And so, I kind of come back to this theme that what we are doing today looks impossible. People look at our financials and say, Kyle, well, there's all these other cannabis companies that make much more revenue than you. Why don't I go buy those? Yes, I agree. If you looked at us based on, financial metrics, like in the early 1990s when Blockbuster was a big movie rental company in the United States where most Americans walked in and got the new James Bond movie or whatever, you could see cash flow, you can see revenues, you can walk into a store. And then along came a company like Netflix that said, we're going to change all that. We're going to ship you the CDs. And eventually they would go, completely get rid of CDs and go into a digital medium. That company was losing money. It didn't generate, the types of revenues that Blockbuster did. And I really think that's another example for our business. Today, we're just crowded in a space where the easiest thing is to grow it in Illinois or Israel and sell it domestically. But 10 years from now, that's going to change. And so if Cleverleafs can survive that journey, it will change the way that this cannabis industry looks in a decade.
I love the vision of, we're not building another Blockbuster. We're building the Netflix of cannabis and looking at it from an insanely challenging perspective. And it sounds that, coupled with the beginning of our conversation, talking about, the way that you're entering this position and the conviction that you have about this industry, it sounds like you're also carrying quite a bit of responsibility with yourself on leading this company and feeling the responsibility of sort of leading this revolution that is imminent to happen. And you almost want to be the one who is doing this for the world, right?
I guess so. I guess that's
how I'm getting
that's my job.
Yeah.
But I'm really I'm a manifestation of all of the visions and the hopes of everybody here at Cleverleafs and what we're trying to accomplish. So I wouldn't say I'm special in any respect. I just I'm in the face and trying to push this campaign globally.
Right. What surprised you about this journey over the last 4 years? What's been really surprising you about either the cannabis market, about running this organization, taking it public, going through the challenges, something non-trivial?
It's very lonely. My job is tricky, but our business is also very lonely. Like there's really no other company like Cleverleafs out there that exists, and so. When it comes to raising investor capital, because we're a startup that is, 5 years old, but we're still a startup, and we've got to raise money. We've got to explain to the world what we're going to do with that capital. And most investors say, well, I've never seen anything like yours, right? Why don't I just go buy, GTI or Canopy Growth, right? I understand those models, right? They make revenue, like great. Those are much easier things, and it's really hard for people to understand our business. And in some ways, our business could also be viewed as competitive. There's a reason those cannabis companies don't want a company like Cleverleafs to succeed, because if Cleverleafs succeeds and we have, one of the largest production centers in the world in Colombia and in Portugal, and you don't grow cannabis in the United States anymore, well, what did they spend $500 million building? That investment they made is obsolete if we succeed, right? So I did not anticipate how lonely and potentially almost counterintuitive the success of our company is in the eyes of many of the industry.
I love it. If you had to think of some inspiring moments or some forms of inspiration that you derive as you go through these challenges that you described before, and it sounds like there's a lot of challenges still ahead, and where do you gather your personal inspiration from?
Well, I remember the most emotional moment I've ever had at the company was right when we were going public, and just a couple of days before that, I had learned about one of my childhood friends. His son had hopped in the car with a bunch of his buddies. They were going to drive out to the mountains and go camping in the middle of the night. And one of his friends, wanted to stop the car at a friend's house to pick something up. Was sort of what happened. And ultimately, this encounter went wrong, and someone ran out of the house towards the car and started firing a gun. And a couple of bullets rang out, and one of them struck my childhood friend's son in the head, and he was pronounced dead at the hospital a couple hours later. And this friend's son of mine had gotten in the car with some friends that wanted to go buy some marijuana. And it was still illegal in my home state. And, this entire, our mission's not done, right? This is still happening. This is happening to friends of mine. It's happening to friends of people listening to this podcast. We have a long ways to go. And this is the kind of violence or just the ecosystem we don't want to deal with when our kids grow up. And so, I can't even measure success on a quarter or two. If Cleverleafs has a good quarter, yes, that's great. But this is the big problem that we're trying to solve. We have to eliminate this mark of violence out of society and turn this into a product that can not only eliminate a black market, but also heal people. So we're still at the very beginning of that journey, but that was probably the most emotional moment in the last 5 or 6 years.
Kyle, this is exactly why I call the show 20-Minute Leaders, and I appreciate your leadership and your insights, and thank you for the inspiration over these 20 minutes. I learned a lot. I'm leaving here with much more energy than I came in, and that is exactly why I'm doing this. So thank you very, very much for everything. Best of luck with Cleverleafs. Best of luck with the mission that you're on, really making a healthier ecosystem, making the world better, both ecologically, sustainability, but also just in terms of our perception and our behavior. So thank you very, very much, and stay safe and stay healthy.